We're back this time with Bwipo from Fnatic, who is joining us on Summoning Insight for the first time. So that's very exciting. Welcome.
Thank you.
I wanted to get you on the same show as Ven, just because one of the things that I've really enjoyed about Fnatic this year is you guys have been using like a variety of different styles in your approach, which has resulted in some really unique compositions and some, I think, very clear strengths that you guys have had. And I thought this last week was interesting because it was kind of a return to those styles, a return to the summer split playoffs where you guys were really innovating with the Senna in the bottom lane. We got to see Hylissang's Pike again, you back on the GP. It was a really important and big win that you guys played very well. So what has been your experience kind of this split in Fnatic? Because it's had some really big highs. And you almost beat Mad Lions this week too, but also, you know, you've struggled at points when you were experimenting with like Soraka Graves and these kind of comps.
I would say so far in the split, we tried to identify our win conditions from our side more than just trying to win every game individually. And what I mean by that is that from a drafting perspective, we asked ourselves, is this how we want to win the game? Because in Spring Split, what a lot of times would happen is someone would overpower a matchup or be in a situation they shouldn't be in, or at least in a much better situation than they should be because of individual skill, rather than this is what should occur in the matchup. So, for example, I would counterpick with one of the, 12 unique champions I played in like 15 games, and I would completely roll someone in a matchup that I had no chance winning. For example, against Rogue, I was playing Zac into Kled, and you know, I got a teleport from Ornn, and we end up killing him, and all of a sudden Zac is the one snowballing on Kled, and it's just a mess, right? Like, enemy team doesn't know what's going on. And we realized that when that doesn't happen, sometimes we would feel lost. This was especially apparent in the series against G2, which is why we were wondering, like, all right, when we first pick a champion like Aphelios, a trap that we would often fall into is that we would draft the whole composition away from Aphelios. So we would have like 4 champions trying to dive in, and Aphelios sitting there being like, guys, I guess I'll throw my ult. And we felt like that doesn't feel right. You know, we have a super, like, in my opinion, Reckless is one of the strongest Aphelios players in Europe still. But you can tell by his record that that doesn't actually translate. And we felt like a huge issue was because when we drafted Aphelios as an early pick, which was, you know, we can argue whether that was good or bad, but when the champion was released, at least, the champion was so broken that you had to almost, or at least people felt that way. Even then, we were struggling so much with actually getting Aphelios to shine that we realized throughout summer or spring split at least, guys, we can't have a situation where we're first picking a champion. We think he's the most broken champion in the current meta, but we actually can't make him work. Like, that's not acceptable. That's like the biggest issue that we ran into, and why in summer there was such a big swing. And why we were like drafting in ways where it was like, this is not really Fnatic, because we were like, our first pick, or at least our first 3 rotation, should set the tone for the game. Your first 3 picks in a draft should be where you're ideally, you're guiding the rest of the game there, right? The rest of the draft will guide. Well, how do I put this? We feel like when you pick a first pick champion on blue side that you value very highly, so not a versatile pick, that your draft should be drafted around them. At least that's the logic that we were making. I think that makes sense, right?
Well, let me ask you this. Like, how is this year's Fnatic coached by Mithy different from the one with Youngbuck? Because from with Youngbuck, like, I knew some of the people more in the team at the time. Like, they made it sound like the genius of Youngbuck was the opposite. It was that, right, the team was having massive issues when you didn't have caps. You were redesigning the team, basically. And so it was the opposite. He was saying, right, here's the few champions we can play. Let's just find ways to get comps that work around these champions. And therefore, I mean, I think actually at the end it was very successful. Suddenly you were a team that was top 8 at Worlds, was having a chance to maybe beat G2. Right, that looked like it worked, but it was a different philosophy to this year, right? Because this year you're not just trying to stay in the tiny champion pools and do it. You've actually experimented a lot, which has also cost you some of the losses as well, right? So what's the difference this year?
I think the biggest difference coming in from 2020 spring, I'll go back to 2019 after that, is I think with Mithy coming in, he wanted to have a much more player-oriented team. So
what does that Youngbuck mean in context? Yeah.
Right. I'll draw the comparison with Youngbuck here. So Youngbuck was like, it was very simple. Aatrox, Gangplank, that's me. You know, like he just looks at me and he's like, all right, I think your Aatrox is really good. I think your Gangplank's really good. I think your Ornn is solid. And your counter picks, I'm gonna let you know what I think you can, like what I like seeing you play, and that's what I'm gonna draft. You know, like I like this champion, I will have you play that. And the style was much more of, I think Zyra Khan is really overpowered. I'm gonna create a draft where Zyra Khan's gonna carry, and I trust my bot lane. They're really good Zyra Khan. We're gonna play that way. So our drafts in 2019 were very much like Twisted Fate showed up. It was like, all right, we got TF, boom, draft is over. You know, like we don't even care about like any details of the draft. It's more like we got TF, we're going to draft the comp we've played a million times. Boom, boom, boom. Everyone locks in their champions. We're going on the Rift, playing the same game we've played pretty much every single week. Whereas with Mithy, it was much more about a player-driven team, and the idea that if I think, for example, Sylas is a super strong answer to Ornn, we're going to find a way to make that work, like as a team. So from the player's opinion into the team. Whereas with Youngbuck, it was like, I see, you know, for example, LCK right now is busting out all the Camille, right? And if Youngbuck likes Camille as a champion, he will transfer that over with the player. Like he'll talk with the player, be like, look, LCK is playing a lot of Camille. I like Camille as a champion. They do it in this situation. I like that. I'm going to draft that. Make sure you can play Camille. Whereas with Mithy, it was much more about, he suggests, hey, look at the LCK. They're playing Camille. What do you think? Do you want to try it? Do you think this is good? Shall we look into that? Yes, no, up to the player. Whereas with Youngbuck, it's, look, Camille, straight up the meta in LCK. The champion looks super broken when it works. We're going to make it work. I want you to have your Camille ready. That's like the biggest difference between, at least from my perspective as a player, between the coaching from Mithy and the coaching from Youngbuck. Is like I have way more say in what I want to play. Not to say that I didn't have any say with Youngbuck, right? Like if he said Camille's the meta, I could tell him, look, I think Jax is the best answer, and if you can get me Jax in the draft, I really don't care about Camille. And then I would have to play scrims and prove to Youngbuck, like, hey, this guy picks Camille, I slam Jax, the guy can't play. You know, like I'm going to carry this game no matter what, so don't worry about Camille. If they ban Jax, like then, you know, maybe we'll talk about it, which is what led into situations where Fnatic couldn't necessarily draft the right champions, that other people, champion pool issues came up in this idea, because people would ban our answers, right? Like people would be like, look, this guy is playing Jax in the Kled, the G2 series, for example. So when they banned Jax, like they picked Kled on 3 and banned Jax, and then I'm playing Renekton, and it was like, this doesn't feel right. It's not as good. That's where the champion pool issues thing came from and the differences.
It sounds like you guys are moving more towards the way that G2 operates in terms of the players kind of driving a lot of these selections. Has that been the main reason that you guys have had such, I would say, inventive strategies? Because, you know, I would say in spring, you guys started pretty standard. Like, you know, there was a lot of MF affilios for Reckless. And then for me, it was really in playoffs when you guys started having those like Senna, Hillisang, split pushing on Trundle games that you were winning, that I started being like, oh wow, these guys have a really cool playbook, and they're playing to some really specific strengths that they have. Was it from the players that those strategies came?
Absolutely. And one thing that people don't realize is a lot of these weren't like extensively practiced. The Trundle thing, like our Trundle split pushing, wasn't something that we figured out beforehand. It was more like in the game, it's like, well guys, it's absolutely lost. How can we make this game as daunting as possible for the enemy team to play? Like, how can we make them sweat for this win? Like, one thing we discussed going into playoffs in the best of 5 series, and this came from Mithy, is that no matter what, if we knew the game was lost, it doesn't matter. Make them sweat as much as possible. Yes. You know you're going to lose. You know your best chance of winning is getting Baron, but it's a 90-10%. Don't go for it. Don't contest it. Go get their inhib. Push waves, make sure they can't end the game, because in a best of 5 setting, if you're 2-1 up, or you're up 2 games, you're up 1 game even, the enemy team's sweating so much for a 45-minute game to get a win, even though they know it's won. The fact that you're putting so much stress on them to hopefully not make a mistake, even though you know that even if they make 5 mistakes, we can't win. The amount of stress you put on them, playing a strategy like that, is way more effective over a course of a best of 5 setting than just saying, you know what, guys, the game is lost. Let's flip it at Baron. We're going to 5v5. We'll jump in there. Let's flip it. Our idea was much more, we're going to flip it at Baron. We're going to have Selfmade going with the smite. That's why he died like, 10 or 12 times that game. And Hilly's just going to go split push Trundle somehow, like just build what you need. Go split push. Make it. Just give him hell.
There's even logic to that. Like, I think people miss to like maybe more casual fans, which is, remember, Hylissang's like a fucking Pike main. And if everyone's ever played support Pike, what you do when you're in a game like this that's basically lost is you just keep split pushing and then fucking run away with a W and E every time they come and get you. So he's obviously done it a million times, I'm guessing, in solo queue. He just transferred the logic to Trundle instead.
Absolutely. And I think he's a
Makes
very
sense.
talented player and seeing that. And like as a top laner, I noticed that he actually understands a lot of these split pushing ideas. Like it's actually very
Seems
impressive.
way
Like,
better
in
than
that
he should
game,
be for a support, yeah.
honestly, like that game on Trundle, I think he displayed some very, very good side laning mechanics and understanding of the game as a support player, which is like me as a player. I had multiple games in 2018 where I just griefed it trying to mimic what he did. And he just first time Trundle support builds a Trinity Force and a Blade, whatever it was, and just goes off and demonstrate. He showed me how it was done, basically. I was really impressed, honestly. And that's something that rediscovering that in your players in that best of 5, also these moments are key moments where you realize like, holy, like, wow, my players are strong. You know, like I never expected that from my support, and it gives so much more confidence when someone out of their comfort zone manages to pull something as big as this off, which is why, in my opinion, not practicing picks too much isn't always a bad thing. Like, this is my experience. For example, Malphite. Going into that playoff series, it's not like we scrimmed 15 games of Malphite. I think I played 2 or 3 games of Malphite that I remember. But the fact that we went on stage and it was such an effective pick, I think helped my team understand, like, this is huge, you know? Like, we didn't even practice much Malphite, but he's carrying the game on his own, you know? Like, he's running around killing Aphelios wherever he goes. I think that helped our team with more mental. And I think that's something that's very undervalued in a best of 5 setting, is how you feel about your team, how you feel about the game in general, and how the enemy team makes you feel.
Especially for Fnatic, because as I alluded to with the last year's team, that wasn't the way that team was at all. You would never do a pick there that you never even practiced at all, right? That's totally alien to the philosophy.
It happened. There was a period in 2018 where it did happen. When I was playing bottom lane, I had a lot of freedom to pick what I wanted, and that was probably because Youngbuck was like so convinced in our top side with Caps and Soaz and Broxa. Like we had a very solid team, and what mattered for us was just more like just make sure bot lane, like we can lane bot lane and Hilly can roam. That was like my responsibility. So if I told Joey, like I told him, hey, like I think Victor here is the best pick. Like I'm gonna have the most priority playing Victor, then he would let me play Victor. Even though I had like 2 games of Victor and scrims. If I said, like, I think Jace is great here because of this reason or because I can roam a lot, he would give me Jace. And that's how I ended up playing a lot of picks. So it's not to say that Youngbuck has like an iron fist on the draft. I definitely wouldn't say that it felt that way. It was more like he much preferred seeing his players have like 3 to 4 champions that they're rock solid on, and he knows he can rely on them in the draft. And if you want to play something spicy, if the time comes, the time comes. But generally speaking, we're going to be looking at those 4 champions, working from there.
Well, it's also that there are different strategies that are going to be effective for different coaches depending on the players that they have. It could, you know, for all we know, that was absolutely the right call at the time. You were still a much newer player when he was doing that. You had less experience. You had, I imagine, you know, less depth.
You also had Brox instead of self-made. There's a whole bunch of scenarios.
Yeah.
Right.
So like, it's not necessarily to say that one is better than the other. However, I think like at this point in time, given the level of experience and skill that currently exists on Fnatic, I do see advantages to the way that Mithy is operating things.
I agree. I mean, I'm very happy and satisfied with Mithy so far. I mean, we have our growing pains, and there are moments that we like struggle with in terms of like reviewing and stuff. Like there's times where it's very unclear how much effort the player is supposed to be putting in, right? When you have a player-driven team, like how much is the player supposed to give and how much is the coach giving? And that's like a very gray area, I think, in our experience, in the idea of like in a player-driven team, how much responsibility do you give the coach and how much responsibility do the players own? Because if you give 100% responsibility to the players, perhaps there is absolutely no structure in what is happening, and you'll suffer from that long term in very tough situations, right? And again, this is something that as a team we're still exploring, and that's why, in my opinion, summer split wasn't like always great because of these like turbulences in experience, right? Like moments where you're like, all right, like, we have to take a step back and be like, this is clearly not working. How can we resolve this issue? How, like, our reviews perhaps are taking too long. People are giving feedback when they shouldn't be. Like, for example, I give feedback on gameplay elements that really don't have anything to do with my role, and I'm overtaking other people's feedback because I'm trying to get my point across so much that people closer to the action don't get their say.
It's actually a problem I've noticed happens. I mean, listen, I have to say NA because they're the ones that have all the reality series. We don't have them for every team in Europe. But if you ever watch those reality series in NA, that's always one of the things as a European. I always used to just be sat there like, is everyone else just cool with the idea that in the review, like the fucking top lane is giving like the support advice as to what you should have done at like level 3? Like, what? Why is no one told that guy to shut the fuck up? Like, what is this? Like everyone's talking as though like, we're all as a team, we're all just going to agree what we should do here. Like the best example ever is this classic one where I remember Reginald berating Dyrus about what boots he bought in top lane in like fucking the end of like 2015. And I think Reginald had been retired for like 2 years at this time, and he was never a top laner. I was just like, is no one just going to tell this guy maybe like we could talk about something more productive than this? Like, it seems like a waste of everyone's time. Like, obviously, you can make a general point as a teammate, like you didn't help me with this later, but like, yeah, the idea you're critiquing their game,
right?
That just feels like that's like people have gone too far with the idea that you can all contribute your opinions. Opinions have to have a hierarchy of importance.
Absolutely, and I think it's something that a lot of teams actually end up struggling with, and me included. Right, I'm a person that I want to give my feedback to someone if I have any, right? Because in my opinion, I think it's harmful to my team if I'm withholding feedback. I think that the issue lies in the timing, right? And when you're sitting in that review and I'm trying to chuck in like, hey, Dyrus, like your boots are awful, rather than like after the review, I like sit next to him or stand next to him on the road home or whatever, right? I'm like, hey, what do you think? Maybe those boots would have been better. That's the ideal you want to reach, right? Because you still want to remind the person that, hey, there's a small optimization you can make. It's just a matter of timing. And I think that I actually struggle with this a lot because I get very emotional when games go bad, especially when I play on stage and we lose a game. And I'm like, I just get it in my head and I fixate on things that aren't necessarily the problem. And I try to solve them because in my perspective, this was why we lost.
Dude, I'll give you the best example ever because it was from your old team, which was when you used to have Soaz and Reckless on the same team. Because everyone's seen, right, what made it actually funny when Reckless cried those times wasn't that he was crying. It's that he would be sat there destroyed and then Soaz would get up like, where's the bathroom? I'm going this way. He would just leave like instantly though, dude. Because he'd seen Roland Reckless his whole life basically. It's a pro. Like he'd seen him the whole time. So he was like, oh, is he doing that shit again? That's not me. Like I'm just off now anyway. Like, but like you'd expect because their teammates he'd go over like hug him or something. He didn't give a fuck. But what's great is that just shows how two people react totally differently in the same scenario. Because the whole point is, if you went to have a conversation with Reckless post game there, you would do it very differently than you would with Soaz. Like there's such totally contrasting personalities. So like I think one of the problems you get into there basically is a lot of people's naive mistake is they just try to approach other people literally just the way they want to be approached. But that doesn't that's not actually a very good rule in life, like when people say like just do what you want other people to do, because that only works if what you want to do is what they want as well. I would say a better approach would be find out the way they want to be approached, because in teams especially this is key, because like you're saying there's certain players where one-on-one, you could probably get through to this guy. In fact, he might want your feedback. Maybe you give him some really key advice. But if you say that in front of everyone in a group setting, maybe that would like shame him, or he wouldn't be able to think about it the same way, or argue with you or something. Like there's so much that's where actually the real skill of coaching is, in my opinion, in sports, etc. Because it's about like knowing people, which is one of the hardest subjects in the world, to figure out what 5 different people are like, how they take things, how you discuss things. There's so much crafts work to that, in my opinion, that like most people aren't equipped to do it.
Well, it's
understandably, especially not players. They're all like 19 years old. I get it. It's fair enough. They haven't had the life experience yet.
It's also the coach's job to, maintain those communication lines between the players as well. And sometimes in the light of what you were saying, Bwipo, it can be better if you tell the coach that information about criticism of another player and that it's disseminated through the coach so you don't look like the bad guy, or so the coach can say, do I agree that this is the most important thing, or this is the most critical feedback that we could give? Because a lot of improving players, generally speaking, is like in the Dyrus example. So sure, you could say the boots were wrong, but is that the most important thing that I think Dyrus should be focusing on to improve? Because if you give somebody too much feedback, then they try and act on it all at once, and it doesn't actually develop them as a player or develop their skill set in any way. So, having the coach be the centralized feedback mechanism where they ensure people don't get overwhelmed with
You gotta let some things go as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, come on, like the most fun ever is those episodes of the reality series where they would all be having like a really serious discussion about like a once in a million time thing that happened where someone just accidentally into team fights. Like, dude, we don't really need to go over that and like freeze frame. Like, he's never going to be in that scenario again. We just need to know what the general point is. You know, like be more responsible if you're the ADC in this team fight. So, like, that's the point to take. People go way too deep on the minutia and that shit as well. Like, you're not literally framing that moment. It's like, I think it's more about tendencies, you know.
For sure, but I think at that point, it's more of like the person being justified that someone else fucked up too.
Sure. There's a lot of that, I'm sure.
Sometimes it's just like you go in that deep because when you initially brought up the point, the person didn't look at you and went, my bad. The person looked at you and went like...
Yeah, it could be.
He just froze, right? He looked at you and he doesn't want to say anything. But in reality, all I want to hear is you say, my bad, right? Because I'm a player like that. I'll be honest with you. I have the tendency of like diving into something. And in that moment, all I want to hear is you accept responsibility. That's really
Bwipo
it.
wants to punish you right now. Apologize to Bwipo.
Exactly. Please just say, my bad. I fucked up. That's it. And I'm happy after that. After that, you want to discuss it 20 more times, I'll go in freeze frame. I know it's relevant, but I will just for the sake of that. But as a player, I think a lot of issue that you have like interacting with each other is that a lot of the feedback, like the whole thing, the whole structure about review is you play the game, you go into review and you cram in everything you can that you want to discuss, and then you go to the next game, right? I feel like that's a bit the culture of scrimming right now in esports, at least in league esports. I'm not sure how it is for other esports. And I feel like that's rather inefficient because when I get feedback on something and I'm playing solo queue on my own on the day after, or the day after, the next day, the same day, that evening, I notice that I can work on that feedback in increments. I don't have to focus on my whole game being that, right? Like, for example, Youngbuck's like, hey, we were doing Dragon and you ended up dying. Or I'll give you a more recent example. Mithy's like, hey, every single good team in the LCK is warding the Herald at 7 minutes something. At 8 minutes, there's a ward on that Herald every game. It's a pink, it's a trinket, it doesn't matter. There's a ward there. I want you to do the same thing. That's very useful feedback. But the thing is, I can do that at 8 minutes in my game, and then I'll be thinking about something else. And what ends up happening is because everything gets focused on feedback in one little instance after the game, you miss opportunities to give feedback throughout the day. Like when I'm playing solo queue and I'm playing a game and someone tells me, hey, your boots are bad this game, I think you have a better opportunity to buy better boots. If I'm being told that just before my game or during my game even, I feel like that's a lot easier to digest than you just got a whole crap of feedback about how terrible your teleport play was, and then someone had to tell you that your mechanics and your execution in the team fight were poor, and then that little bit, hey, your boots suck too. Like
it's overwhelming.
Exactly. And I think that's in my opinion a problem with the culture in esports is that reviewing is like, review should be like, we're getting everything in and then we're stopping. It's not like, all right, this game, we're going to work on this. And then next game, if nothing went wrong the next game, you can maybe work on that too. I don't think it's like a work in progress type of thing. I feel like issues in League of Legends aren't a work in progress type. Like players in general, they aren't being looked at, you're a work in progress. It's more like you're expected to play the perfect game every single game you play.
I would agree.
And when you don't, you get it, like you basically get attacked on every single small mistake you make. Right?
Yes.
I don't think that's a necessarily
it's also
bad
it's
thing.
like the wrong way to handle your relationship with your significant other also, where I think the other thing that comes out is the same way you shouldn't have arguments with your romantic partner, which is like something triggers it, and then you start bringing up all of the old shit that you're mad about at the same time. And it's like, well, we can't actually fix our relationship or have a conversation because now it's just a conversation about everything at the same fucking time. So you just can't do that, right? Like you just have to both agree that can never happen. And I do think that it's true. How would you solve this? I'm curious. Do you think that it would be better for you to have like an individual position coach who is sitting there like watching your solo queue every game that you play and kind of saying, hey, maybe on this champion you could make these itemization choices? Would it help to have that individual researcher who's like, hey, Bwipo, in LCK when they're over there playing the Camille and it's in this matchup, I looked at the data and it shows that most players do this alternate build path that we think is more effective based on the math?
I think that obviously helps, right? Having people help you is always help, right? It's on the person whether they can receive that help or not. That's not always easy, right? Being told by someone at silver that everything you're doing in small increments is wrong by minuscule differences, right? Because the thing is I'm gonna derail on this a little bit. Is that the idea of League of Legends is if it's not optimal, it's bad.
No, that's the fan mentality, dude. We talked about this before.
That's Mithy's mentality to some degree. That's how he is as well.
That is true. But I just think that's like such a gamer mentality where like we were talking about this on the episode with Zazel, where like the reaction is like, if it isn't godlike, then you are a piece of shit trash can. Like there's nothing in between. It's just these huge discrepancies.
I'll give you an example. LS and Olaf. Olaf has been the spawn of hell for LS ever since the champion has existed in competitive League of Legends. I believe, at least that's the notion I get. You know, I'm sure he doesn't feel that way all the time, but
I think he also plays it up for entertainment, right? So like he's an entertainer too. You got to remember that,
right? Obviously. But for example, yesterday Olaf was first picked in the LCS. I believe it was Golden Guardians or something. And the thing is obviously the champion has weaknesses, and it's not the optimal first pick. But the idea is you can play around the weaknesses, and if you're able to use the strengths, that's
skill
what
match
you
or
want to
something.
do.
Yeah, exactly.
If you feel confident to do that, then despite the discrepancy that you're going to face at some point, you're confident you can do what you need to do to win the game. Now, what I want to go back to is help is always good when you're being coached individually. But I think the problem that a lot of people have when they look at professional players is that they're not a work in progress. So for example, me as a player, if I were having trouble over the course of a game, the way I would want to be coached is very simple. My first 1 to 5 minutes is not consistent enough. So as a player, I'm playing X lane matchup or Y lane matchup. It doesn't matter. The point is that in this specific matchup, I should be having a 5 CS lead, or I should be ungankable, or there's a few things that can happen in League of Legends where we talk details, or for example, Aatrox Gangplank. Aatrox shouldn't be able to have control over the minion wave against Gangplank, because Gangplank's a stronger champion than him. But if I mess up, then Aatrox can take control, potentially look for an all-in, and have kill pressure. This should never be allowed in a game of League of Legends where both players are equally skilled and are aware of how the matchup is supposed to be going. That said, in review, people often don't go from square one. So you play out the whole game, Aatrox Gangplank, I'm playing Gangplank. I messed up minute 5, I messed up minute 15, I messed up minute 25, I messed up minute 35. We don't go back to square one. We're not looking, hey, minute 5, right now, your wave isn't in the position it should be. So as a player, I want to be a work in progress in the idea of, honestly, what happened at 25, 15, and 10 minutes, I really don't care, because I ended up there because I messed up initially. And because we're not treating me as like a person. I mean, I treat myself that way, and I have gotten other people to look at the game the same way I do in that idea, so it's much easier for me to improve. But my point is that other professional players, I don't feel that way. I don't feel that people are going back to minute 5 and being like, hey, you're laning 1 to 5, it isn't going the way it should. That's not to say that you should ignore the mistakes that happen later on. There's still valuable feedback that you can potentially use. But what you should be focusing on is getting your players through minute 1 to 5, then minute 1 to 10, minute 1 to 15, minute 1 to 20, minute 1 to 25, minute 1 to 30, until the end of the game, right? And when your player is able to consistently deliver minutes 1 to 30, playing the champions that he plays, that he thinks are strong, and the meta, if you will, that is when you're going to see improvement in your players consistently, and you're not going to have situations where player A, I'll give you an example. I'm trying to think of an example of a player that was great and then fell off completely. Thinking of something like Forgiven. This player was considered top level AD carry in 2015, right?
Sure.
I believe it was 2015.
Yeah, that was the year with us.
Was it this year? I believe it was this year, right? There was a drama, right?
Yes, this year on Schalke, where he started the season.
Right, and I think that one of the reasons is because him perhaps, or the people around him, didn't have that idea of, guys, let's just make sure that our minutes 1 to 10 are going to work out the way we want it to, and then 1 to 15, and then you're going to be able to improve yourselves at a rate where no one's really going to be able to catch up with you, because League of Legends is not that difficult in the idea of, if I play Gangplank 20 times and I focused on my minutes 1 to 20 every single game, and all I had to do was make sure that I followed the game plan well, game plan is something I don't like saying because it has such a negative connotation, but I followed the matchup the way it's supposed to be played. And
let's call it the perfect matchup. The perfect, if both players are playing
ideal or whatever.
The ideal matchup, right?
Exactly. Then I should end in position X. Worst case scenario, I'm in position X. Best case, I'm X plus 1k gold. Or whatever best case that could be. And that's where I think that a lot of professional players and teams struggle significantly, because they're not able to identify what position X is, and they're not able to coach players to get to X without so much variance happening that you can't actually tell how skilled a player is, right? Because the skill of League of Legends is consistency.
Sure, yeah.
Ultimately, when you're looking at a League of Legends player, you're looking at his consistency.
Well, any sport. You would argue that about any sport, but yes.
Sure. I can agree with that. Solo queue ladder, consistency. A professional player not being challenger is a lack of consistency, in my opinion. You're playing against solo queue players like everybody else. If you're not challenger, you lack that consistency. Whether that is your gameplay or your mindset or whatever it is, there's something going wrong, in my opinion. With that said, forcing this consistency onto players and teaching them how to maintain that consistency is what will have them have a long and fruitful career, in my opinion. And this is something that we're completely missing in esports. I don't feel like anyone's talking about this.
But I think
I'll give you an analogy. Yeah, go on then, Monty.
No, I think like the thrust of what you're saying here is like if your goal is consistency, then you have to figure out a way to teach players consistency.
Right.
But here's the key, is that telling a player the way an ideal matchup should play out is not going to give them consistency, because the minute-to-minute decisions based off of variance are what is going to lend the consistency, because you have to know so many different possibilities. So you did a very deep take here, so you tell me if I'm summarizing this correctly. What you're saying is that the most effective form of coaching is to look at the variance in order to produce consistency and try and fix the very small decisions that lead to the consistent state, rather than just kind of going out there and saying, this is the overarching ideal way that this should play out, and expecting someone to be able to reverse engineer that. Is that correct?
I would say that like both big and small, right? Sometimes it's just blatantly obvious what the mistake is. But yes, I agree that the small things. My issue is that right now, when you're joining an esports team in general, is that when you join that team, you're expected to know 1 to 20. And when you don't, it's like, oh, well, you know what? He'll figure it out on his own, is how I feel. When I watch other teams play, for example, like the players that come in, for example, in LCS is a great example. LCS recycles a lot of players. When they don't have that basic level, I don't feel like they're being treated as a work in progress. It's more like, you get this. If he gets better, fantastic. If he gets worse, let's find someone that can do that.
I'll give you an analogy, Monty. This is one you'll like. You'll understand it yourself. And actually, people don't need to know this language to understand the point I'm going to make. I'll give you a very simple example, right? When I first came to Korea to actually live there, not just go on holiday, I was going to live there for like most of the year, and I was going to come back to Europe for Counter-Strike events. Like a lot of naive people, I thought, right, I'll get a bunch of books and start trying to learn Korean. Wouldn't that be fun to know their language, right? And one of the things I found out super early on, which is embarrassing, right, is that like most people who've only ever been there for a holiday, I wasn't even saying the word hello correctly. I was saying it completely incorrectly, because if you listen by ear to someone in Korean say hello, it sounds like all they say is 안녕하세요, right? That sounds like all they're saying. Because what they do is, like every language, the more fluent you are, the more fluid it is. Like they just go through it without any hitches. Whereas if you say it, if you're basically from the West, what you should actually do is break it up and just say 안녕하세요. Yep. If you say it like that, right, no one Korean will ever say that back to you. That's not how they pronounce it. But that is actually the best way as a Westerner, that you will start, like you're saying, at step one of the basics. You've broken it up. You're learning how each sound works correctly. You just focus on saying that. You don't focus on trying to sound Korean. If you try and sound Korean, you're going to fuck it completely. But if you do it this way, right, over time, as you get more fluid at saying the sounds, it will start to sound more like what they say. But if you tried to do it by ear, like I said, your ear basically won't hear the subtle parts of them saying it. That's why I use this example of saying hello, basically.
Right.
And so you will sound like you're the noob because you're saying it like a child, like I'm going to ask it, but you will be saying it more correctly than the idiot Westerner. Who the analogy here is like a Westerner in LCS watching a Korean comp, but they don't know why the comps run that way. They don't know what the top lane is trying to do. The classic examples like the Joggermorph in 2015. There was LCS teams drafting it with like the wrong Lulu position and stuff, like just stuff that they hadn't even understand the fundamentals of what they were doing. So the point in this, the reason why I get your analogy here is, if you try to tell someone to copy the idealized matchup, they're never going to be able, they could never get there because you're asking them to be the end product already. They have to start as like level 1, the ingredients, and put them together the correct way. So I've no doubt there's aspects that are totally hidden and nuanced to the matchup before you get to that point. So I see your point, because basically most review and coaching I've seen in esports for nearly all the time I've been in it is what we're saying here. You take the end result, you go results oriented, and you go, right, here's where we lost the game, guys. Look, he did the wrong Lee Sin kick here. And you analyze it, right, as though that scenario was going to play out every time. And next time, just remember not to kick him that way. Whereas, as you're saying, a way more logical way to do it would be like, how did we even end up in this team fight? Like, didn't we have the better team fight in comp? And why didn't we have map pressure? Like, that makes way more sense to be like, oh, here we go, Bwipo. At 7 minutes, you fucked up the lane interaction here where, you know, you could have gotten ahead and the jungler would have given you a freeze and then you would have had lane control. Whatever the scenario is, that makes way more sense to coach that way than it does to go at the end of a million sequences that might never happen again and say, do this differently.
The thing is that feedback is still useful. I'm not going to say that it's not. You telling me you should have kicked them that way is like, do you know what? You're right. And if I can think about it, I will. But it should be like
It's
at the end.
Yeah,
exactly.
sure.
It's like, this is extra. You know, I'm happy that you can give me that extra information.
Yes.
But even before a composition and picks you copy, what I'm trying to allude to more is the fact that as a professional player, if you, for example, I'll take Cries, XL's Cries, new player coming into the LEC. He's expected to produce the same end product as I believe Expect was, right?
Yes.
Expect far more
Totally
experience.
different style players as well.
For example, he's expected to produce the same result I am going to produce. And I don't feel like the way, or at least, and perhaps this was different in his case, right? I can't speak for anyone's cases on a one-to-one basis. It's just my overall perception is that people aren't being coached in an idea of, to be able to produce the same result, we should go back to the start and work from there. And then slowly but surely build on that. Let's build the foundation, right? Let's work on that. And of course, when you're fortunate enough to work with players that don't need that, right? You come into a player and this guy knows every single matchup, minute 1 to 15, top of his head, performs every single matchup, knows everything. Then you can start doing the coaching where you're like, all right, in this particular situation, you don't, you know, like you should have kicked them that way, or you shouldn't use your ult like that, your teleport. All these details, they can come in at that time. But more important than that is to teach your players how to produce a consistent result. And I think that's one of the reasons that I've noticed that I've had success in my rookie year, which is something that it wasn't actually my rookie year. I played in Turkey and then I played in Russia and then I went LEC. But the thing is what I learned there was exactly that. I learned that if I can't produce that consistent result, then I'm worthless as a player. It's that simple. I thought I was a good player. I hit rank 1 when I was in Russia. I almost got relegated.
Well, the pro game is very different than the latter.
I disagree. 100% disagree. This is something that I fundamentally disagree with, and why I think the LPL is so strong. It used to be fundamentally different because every jungler...
It is more similar now. That is very true.
Right. Every jungler would run around with green smite in competitive and blue smite in solo queue. So it would be a fundamentally different game in the past. Absolutely. People wouldn't make a vision-oriented game, and people wouldn't focus on the vision aspect in solo queue whatsoever. Even right now, it's not something that's a big deal of your solo queue, right? And that's basically the only difference between competitive and solo queue at this stage of the game. The same picks show up, the same champions show up. They get fed, they don't get fed. For example, I had 10 kills in my last OG game. Like, I'm sure Upsets walked into a 10-kill GP in solo queue too, right? It happens to everyone. And because that aspect of the game is gone, in my opinion, solo queue is about as close as you're going to get to competitive, right? Scrims is the same thing as solo queue. Like,
well, Riot has succeeded in their goal then. Riot has succeeded because that is what they wanted. Yeah. That is what they wanted.
And in my opinion, that's why LPL is strong, right? Because when I see the LPL players play, I'm not thinking that they're thinking. I just see them look at the situation and they're like, this is my best shot. And if that's a 90%, they'll take it. If it's a 40%, they'll take it. Like you would play solo queue. And it's the same for me, you know, like a lot of people give me shit for dying and all. But honestly, like I've been 0-2 in my lane way more often than I've had to drop 4 waves under my turret because we were making a play at Dragon. I'll tell you that much. When I'm in solo queue, I'm standing under that turret and I'm like, well, I hope I can outplay them. Let them come. If I die, I die. I'll make them sweat for it. You know, like if they don't want to kill me, fantastic. I get my fire. If they do, that's fantastic too. But the thing is me walking all the way to my tier 2 bush. How often does that actually happen in my solo queue? Well, I'm going to tell you never, because I don't do that. I'm not a player that's like, I don't want to win that bad in solo queue. But the thing is, if I don't want to do that in solo queue, then that means I just don't want to win enough. So in my opinion, I should do the same thing on stage. And if I'm going to tell myself, I'm going to go on stage and I'm going to walk all the way back and not die there or contest that area, then I should do that in solo queue too. And I feel like this is something that a lot of players don't have. I stand under my turret and die, and I just tell my teammates, I'm gonna go for this wave, and if they kill me, they kill me. At least I'll take their wave, or I'll outplay them, whatever, right? This is how I play. This is how I play. I'm going to do that in solo queue. I'm going to do that. And the thing is, even if I'm in a worse position, right? I died and I lost the wave. I have practiced that situation multiple times in solo queue because I've done it so many fucking times, right? I've been griefing. You know, you can call it griefing. You can call it what you want. I've been doing that in solo queue ever since I started playing this game.
So let me ask a question that ties this into the coaching point. So I'm a big believer in, if you have the resources, if you are given the resources to have an advantage, then you should use those resources to increase your advantage. And by what I mean by this is, if I'm a professional player making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, if I'm in the LCS and I'm getting paid $700K, I would take some of that money and I would hire a bunch of people to be Monty's player coaches. You know, fuck the team. Like, I'd ask the team for it first, but personally, I would want these people because I would want them to be able to move from team to team with me. So I would have like Monty's raft of analysts who are watching my solo queue games. Maybe they're college kids. Like I'm, you know, it's their college job. Anybody, a college student would love that. I just, you know, my job is, while I, you know, go to school and study, I also, you know, spend a few hours, you know, 10 hours a week, 15 hours a week, doing like builds and matchups based, you know, you just assign them various things, or you hire like a head analyst who's like, you know, coordinating all the crony analysts, right? And so what I don't understand is, like, professional athletes will hire their own mental coaches, right? They will hire sometimes their own personal coaches. If you're making that much money, just spend like $100K of it hiring a bunch of people to help you. Like, why don't people do this?
Dude, I'll even go
because
further.
you're gonna make more money.
Has anyone ever heard this analogy that LS often tells, that in Korea, apparently, the way that they know that a champion's going to be super OP out of nowhere is the one tricks just get amazing on it out of nowhere. I'd do the same thing. I would just go and pay some like Hecarim one trick if I'm like a top player.
Yes.
Like, if that comes in the better, I would just pay that guy $1,000 and say, just tell me everything.
Yeah. Exactly. You hire them as consultants. So like, you have somebody who's watching the Korean ladder. If something wacky, like we saw this with Soraka recently. I think that was the biggest example of it, was that the Soraka started to power up within the last year. And that was like because of one tricks in Korean solo queue. So like, why don't you have some dude who's like, well, why is this champion like doing so well off of these one tricks? Do you just contact those people and you say, I will pay you this amount of money to tell me the Soraka secrets? Like I don't understand why people don't do this. I mean, maybe they do. To be fair, I don't know that they don't do that, but I've never heard of it.
I talked to a lot of
this way. I think actually Faker himself said something that he did something like this. I think Faker said he messages one tricks to ask him for advice. By the way, that's baller as fuck as well. If you're famous enough, Faker doesn't even have to pay. Faker just say, if it's just mail account, it's like, excuse me, sir, can you please tell me how to play the game? You're going to tell him for free, aren't you? Like, if I'm Faker who's I'm just getting that shit for free all day long. Come on.
I just think like you just hire someone to be like the one trick whisperer who like finds them and like, you know, tames them for you, as it were, and gives you that information. But I just like, this is the same frustration that I have with streamers, where it's like some of these streamers are making like millions of dollars a year and they're sitting in their fucking bedrooms. I'm like, you could literally hire like 10 people to be your production staff and like get a studio for yourself and look like a god. Because at that point, you're increasing like the production value in your stream by such a degree that no one can catch up to you. In the same way here, where you can take some of your money and spend it to make yourself better so that people can't catch up to you, in which case then you acquire a larger contract next time. whoa, what an idea. But I just don't understand why players themselves don't take advantage of this. And the players are young, that's fine. But what about agencies? Where are their agents? Like if I'm a manager or an agent, I'm like, hey guy, I'm going to manage this for you and you're just going to pay for it, but I'm going to make you better. And then we're both going to make more money.
Why aren't you an agent?
Maybe I should be.
I mean, realistically speaking, for me at least, my experience is very simple. Is the one trick thing? I talk to one tricks. I clicked on my client right now, and I'm scrolling down, and I can count at least 6 one tricks that I've talked to in the last few months, trying to understand their champion, understand their strengths, understand the game better, right? From their perspective, like because the thing is, when you're playing these champions and when they have so much success, they usually do something different, right? When not everybody can play Zillion at a very high level, or not everybody can play Camille at a very high level, then there must be something they're doing different, a perspective they have that you don't have. And that's why I think that it's very valuable. And I agree with you 100% in the idea that having people help you is a huge deal. And if organizations can't provide you that, you should look for it yourself. And I've been fortunate enough to have had someone that helped me improve on League of Legends on a day-to-day basis ever since I started being up and coming. His name Shaves, and he fortunately for us joined Fnatic just now in summer. So right, and he's been there with me ever since I think 2016. I've been working with him, and I owe a lot of my growth as a player to that, right? The whole idea of building up my early game from minute 1 to 5, because I was a solo queue player, right? I would play Jace 20 games, and half of them I would have 15 kills, and half of them I'd have 15 deaths, right? And it's like, well, clearly, if you can manage to get 15 kills in a challenger level game, you've got the mechanics and decision making to be a good player, but we're lacking something in the consistency department when you end up dying 15 times, right? So the idea is to guide the players into the right direction, because often these talents and players that are being recycled, that are being used in professional teams, they have what it takes. They have the understanding. It's just the idea of having the guidance to get them there.
So what's Shaves doing with Fnatic now?
I think he's helping out the team in general and just like trying to build up more of a better structure for our team. I think that's like the first thing. Like the thing is it's a work in progress, right? And that's why I like working with him. Is for him, it's not like he's coming in day one, this is what needs to change. It's more like, all right, we're a couple of weeks in, let's understand what's going wrong through the experience of these weeks and adjust as we go. There's no drastic measures. It's just after 6 weeks, this has felt rather unfortunate. The way we're reviewing doesn't feel right. We can make these small adjustments to our review to lead us into the right direction and then still have room to adapt. And I think that's the general idea. So I can't really put my finger on this is what he's changed, but our general approach as a team, the way we want to approach the game, the way we want to draft, the way all these things are just, we're asking ourselves questions, and I feel like he asks the right questions very often, which is why I value him a lot, because I'm not, like, as a League of Legends player, I'm smart enough to understand what I need to do right. Sometimes I just need to hear the right question to get to the answer, if that makes sense.
Right. Monty, I have to go in a minute, so I've got one last topic I want to ask Bwipo about here, which is, that's been 2.5 hours, which is, like, whenever they release those comms that show the Fnatic voice comms, Bwipo, I'm sure people have asked you about this, but I've just never been on a show where we asked you about it. Right? Whenever we hear them for this year, the comms always go like this. It's like you and fucking Hylissang are like, fight, I think we fight this. This looks like a good fight. Fight, should we go and fight? And then, like, Reckless just says nothing. Nemesis just sort of goes, like, I have to leave the fight now. And then, like, everyone else is trying to leave. Like, why are they like, it sounds like there's some bizarre dynamic in Fnatic. Like, what's the deal with that?
Where do I put my finger on it? Honestly, it's a great question, and it's something that I have to ponder myself as well, right? From my team's perspective, like, how come me and Hilly are so inclined to fight, whereas our teammates aren't? And I believe that it's very simple. The same mentality that comes from stage and solo queue and scrims that are all the same in the same boat. Stage is not different from scrims. It's not different from solo queue. At least to me, and I think I get the same vibe from Hylissang, whereas I feel like other players on our team don't have that, right? It's like, it's stage. It's stage. Why didn't you do that? It's stage. Why did you do that? It's stage. It's actually an answer to a question. it's on stage. I would never do that on stage. Then why did you do it in scrims? And that's how me and Hilly work. In solo queue, we would be fucking balling to the enemy team. Let's murder them, you know? Like, we're going in. We're the same on stage. We're like, you know what? This looks like an all right fight. I'm down to take it. Are you down? Yeah, I'm down. Let's fight. So I'm calling, let's fight. Hilly's like, let's fight. And then the rest of our team's like, I don't have the 100% win label yet. I'm not sure. And I think that's where it comes from. It's like, when you're on stage, you want that label of like, we can't lose. Tack it on. That's why you see those stage drafts where you've got like 15 scaling champions, or like scaling worth 15 champions in a team composition, and why so many teams are so hesitant to draft early game, right? Because what would you rather? Like, you reach a point with Ornn where you've got 5 ornaments, or 6 in total, because Ornn's got 2. You're walking into a team fight with 10k gold generated by your champions. Gangplank, Twisted Fate, Pikes generated some gold with his ult. Well, God forbid you fight early game. But yeah, hopefully you've reached the point where you've generated some more gold, and you've basically cheated yourself into a way where you can't lose anymore. I feel like this is what, like, the philosophy, like, what everyone wants to reach when they play a professional game of League of Legends, rather than just, you know what, I'm going to play what I'm really fucking good at, and I'm going to make this guy bleed if he wants to stop me from doing that, right? Because that's the idea. That's what early game champions are. And that's why, if you think about it, how many players are known for playing champions that do nothing for 30 minutes and then carry? Compared to how many players are recognized for, you're laying against this guy for 5 minutes, you're done. Like, you want to go home.
Sure.
There's a huge discrepancy, right? Because it's so much more difficult to be that guy that doesn't do anything. Nothing will happen, and I'm going to carry the game. It's so much harder than being the guy that's like, you know what, give me 15 minutes and there's a good chance I've killed him 3 times.
I think that that's also part of the way the game has changed, though. I think back in the day, you could be known for being passive, and it's just not possible with the way that the game has changed. And frankly, just players having a better knowledge of their team's limits and when they can take advantages, right? I think before, you know, and this is true of any esport or any new game, is that there is a period where waiting is the smart thing, because players will make enough mistakes that if you are patient, you can catch those mistakes, and that's the more efficient way to play. The better teams and players get at that game, the fewer opportunities there are going to be to take advantage, and you have to play more aggressively naturally as the kind of meta of I would say almost any esport develops.
And I 100% agree, especially with the fact that people will make mistakes. It's just the fact that as a team, you all being 5 players on the same page that a mistake is happening and you're ready to punish that is so much harder than potentially being the team making a mistake by going aggressive, right? Like, if you're all on the same page, we're playing an early game comp, and all 5 of you are on the same page, if we're going to just smash these people early game, that's way easier to execute than recognizing a mistake in real time and all agreeing that this is the opportunity to fight. Because the way League of Legends is balanced, at least right now, around the Dragon Soul especially, right? A lot of people complain about the Dragon Soul, is that when you're playing that scaling comp, recognizing that mistake as a whole team, a 5-man unit, and immediately acting upon it being the scaling composition to then crawl back into the game is clearly the optimal way. I'm not arguing that. That is 100% the optimal way of winning competitive League of Legends.
Do you think the game is too linear or too obvious around the Dragon Soul right now, because it effectively forces fights because of its power level?
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a game where people should be fighting, at least in my opinion, right? So is it too linear? Maybe, but that's exactly what I want. When I watch a game of League of Legends for my own viewing pleasure, I'm not sitting there being like, I'm waiting for that 45-minute fight where they fight once and the game's lost. No, I'm watching because I want to see this guy pop off, right? I'll tell you right now, back in season 3, when I opened my LCK Twitch channel and I saw Monty and Doa casting and I was watching Faker, I wasn't sitting there and being like, oh, jolly gee, I can't wait for Faker to win a team fight at 35 minutes. I was sitting there being like, I can't wait for this guy to go all in at minute 8 and completely demolish him. Do you know what I mean? Like, I want to see something happen out of nowhere. I want to see something that I've never seen before. Like, I want to see something exciting, something that I can't predict. Right? And that's what I think the game is doing right now. And that's why I think growing as a viewing sport still. Because in the end, unexpected things will happen around Drakes, right? People will hover around Drakes. A jungler might try to sneak it. There'll be a random fight there. Some crazy stuff will happen. It'll be exactly what you want as a viewer, right? So as a professional player, is that a little bit frustrating? Sure. It's annoying when you play a scaling composition and the enemy team wins because they rolled Ocean Soul instead of Cloud Soul. Yeah. But in the end, that's what, as a viewer, I want to experience. And as a player, I want to, right? I enjoy this video game. It's my job, but I enjoy it. And that means that in the end, variance is something I appreciate. So for me, on top of that, I have the ability to make the conscious decision of being the aggressive team that plays for the soul or being the scaling team that waits to potentially deny them soul and then have outscaled them, right? So is it linear? Yes, but you've got enough options in my opinion.
Fair enough. Well, jokes on you guys for thinking that we were actually going to talk about LEC games. We avoided that with Bwipo's philosophical power hour.
Just waffle about fucking dog shit. Like, SK play Fnatic, who cares? Like, let's see at the end of the split. We talked about the important things that matter more. Exactly.
Thank you for joining us, Bwipo. Appreciate it. Maybe we'll talk about, maybe you'll come back on later and we'll actually talk about real games that happen. But I thought this was very enjoyable. We'll see you guys next week. Same time. Till then.